Support for makers comes from Bank of America and by Cypress Cove.
Of course I'm angry, but, and I've done my share of yelling and screaming. At some of the earlier meetings we were saying we're dialing 911 and the Army Corps and the Water Management District need to pay attention to this. In the fall of '05, Sanibel really got hit with an enormous increase in discharges from the Caloosahatchee, and so instead of finding clear turquoise water, we had coffee-colored water and you couldn't see to the bottom of the sand, and we had balls of scum in canals, and we had algae.
She wanted us all to be change makers. She wanted us to learn from her experience about how we could really make a substantial change that's sustainable to better the lives of everyone involved. And she would want us all to engage our communities on any level we can.
I think that she would wish that her legacy is that we find a better way of handling our governmental issues. She was a believer in building consensus and listening to people and finding their points of commonality.
She was always very direct. You always knew her opinion. She always had an opinion, and she was always very free to share it.
I think part of being a latchkey kid from very early on, even before that term was coined, gave her a drive and a focus that carried her through, that never ended.
My mother was orphaned a couple times over, depending upon how you look at it, and really raised herself.
Her father died when she was very young, and her mother when she was about 13.
She was 14. She was living in Syracuse, New York, and living with a stepfather who was fairly abusive. When she was encouraged in high school by the counselor to get on that track, to not go to college, but to learn how to sew, and typical homemaker trends at the time, didn't want anything to do with that. She wanted to study language. She wanted to travel. She did a lot of writing and won a scholarship to go and live in Germany, and won another scholarship to go and travel in India. And those experiences opened her eyes to that whole broader world. She and a friend would go and travel all over the world, and they visited 67 countries, I believe, in the end, and would stay with families in those different areas, and would take opportunities to go and lecture and teach and engage professional and intellectual level of whatever it was that was going on in those places. You know, in the 1960s, this was the time when socialism in society and the social movement was very, very strong, and those folks that came out of the 60s knew how to make things happen, and just being active, making their voice heard, paying attention to what's going on in politics were key. And she latched onto those things and found different ways to bring about change. They organized hundreds of little community groups, different neighborhoods, and it came time that they could actually get somebody elected to take over City Hall. Now, the city was very corrupt. We were always tagging along and going to different events and campaign events or meetings and sitting around in the background. She was involved in the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, again, for the whole city of Boston. She was always looking for what's next. And at that point in time, the what's next was to run for Congress. But as soon as Joe Kennedy entered the race, of course, we know where that went. She was looking around for places to go and loved the fact that there was this progressive community here, and learning about how Sanibel had been established and how the concern about the environment and all of the things that were in place to really sustain Sanibel as a beautiful estuary in southwest Florida, and was always very environmentally aware and wanted to help preserve that.
I first met future Mayor Johnston when she was the chairperson of our local planning commission.
She put an article in the newspaper every week telling the community, because it is a community-run government, what the commission was doing and inviting people to come down and participate. And that's how I met her. I went down to the meeting and started paying attention to what was going on in government.
She ran for city council, and the first day she was on council, she was elected mayor. While Ms. Johnson was mayor, she really saw the need to address the water quality issue as a regional issue if we were going to have any level of success. And she took the fight beyond just our community, but began to bring this as an issue for all of the communities in our region.
She was about engaging people to participate in government, getting people to see their role, their part, building consensus around an issue so that it could be moved forward in a helpful way. Carla always marched to her own drummer. And while those of us that were her friends were stricken by her not allowing us to say goodbye while she was still here, that was the way she was going to do it, and there wasn't going to be any other choice.
It was a shock. Learning about her cancer and how far along it was a big shock. My sister and I were here. We were talking about plans for the next several months, but all of a sudden, it was all over. It was time. She knew how to get people organized, and she was a great listener. One person said that she collected friends like people do marbles, and it was latching on to people and their needs and thinking about what she could do to help them. That really made a difference.
Support for Makers comes from Clive Daniel Home and by Chico's.